Alright, step one, we're going to take our X contact bearing and place that into the narrow plate, and then secure it with 5 of the shortest button heads in the kit. Tighten those up so they're snug. Then you'll take the 2 new bearings that you've got in your narrow module kit and go ahead and push those into the plate on the bottom here. Now we're going to take our azimuth gear and place the bearing into the underside. Should fit pretty easily in there. And take your small bevel shaft, slide that through. We'll take our small gear here, place it on. And then there's a little retaining ring clip that needs to slide on there. You'll probably want a pair of pliers for this. The little bit of force should snap right on there. Now's a great time to press the diametrically polarized magnet into your center column shaft. It's usually a little bit of a press fit, so you'll want to use something like an arbor press or a C-clamp to make sure that the magnet presses in all the way. It should be sticking out about 1/8 of an inch after you've pressed it in. Now you'll press in both of your 6802 bearings into your double gear. One goes on top and one goes on the bottom. It should be a pretty easy 2-finger press fit. Then you'll take the center column shaft and you slide it through both bearings. You want to make it so the part that has the magnet sticking out goes through the side of the gear that is larger. And you'll see the little triangle shaped end stick through the smaller part of the gear. And then you're going to get your azimuth gear, and you'll notice that there is a flat on the triangle for both the center column shaft and for the azimuth gear, so you just want to make sure those line up when you put them together. And lastly, on this part, you'll just grab your 1/2 inch long 1032 button head and thread that in on the underside of the azimuth gear into the center column. Snug that up nice and tight, and then make sure that the gears still spin and that nothing is binding. Okay, we're going to attach our bevel gear to our wheel. So it's pretty easy. There are 6 832 bolts, socket heads that you will just slide through there. I like to go every other one to start here. Make sure that the bevel gear is going on straight. Then just go around and snug up all 6 bolts. Make sure they're nice and tight. Make sure your bevel gear is flat against the wheel. Now we'll start to assemble the azimuth gear stack up with the main plate. So to start here, you will take the azimuth gear, place it through the X contact bearing on your main plate. Should spin pretty nicely. And then we'll take the small bevel gear and place that on the bevel gear shaft. And you'll take the bevel gear shim and place it right after the small bevel gear on the shaft. And then take the M148 bearing and place that onto the shaft as well. Now we'll take one of the forks. You'll want the one that has the bearing cut out on it and place it onto the bearing. Should snap on nice and easy. And we'll take 2 of our 1032 1.25" socket head bolts. Start to thread those in by hand so the threads catch. And then I alternate back and forth and tighten them up a little bit just to make sure you're tightening them evenly. And then once they're all the way tight, just go ahead and snug them up. Make sure they're nice and tight. And now we'll assemble the rest of the wheel and fork assembly. So let's take our 3/8 bearings, put those in each side of the wheel. If you don't already have tread on your wheel, now is probably a great time to add that onto it. Now the way I like to do this step is to take the opposite side of the fork and grab your shoulder bolt, slide it all the way through the wheel and both bearings so it's sticking out of the other side. And then basically you're going to sandwich the wheel between both forks and get the shoulder bolt lined up with the other side of the fork. And start to thread the shoulder bolt in to the other side of the fork, but don't tighten it up all the way yet. And then you'll take the other two 10/32" long bolts, and for these two you're going to go through the bottom of the fork up into the gear. So start to thread those tight, but don't snug them all the way up yet. And then basically I just alternate tightening the shoulder bolt, then tightening the 10/32 bolts up. And you just want to get to a point where all of them are nice and snug and tight, but you also want to make sure that everything's still moving smoothly during this process. If things bind up during a step, try to back off one of the bolts and make sure everything's tightening up evenly as you go. Now we'll start to assemble the spur gears onto the shafts. So we have our two identical shafts here. You place them into your bearings. For the azimuth, we have our small azimuth gear. You want to place that onto the shaft first. Next, you'll take the second longest of the hex spacers and slide that on top of the small azimuth gear. And then grab your 40-tooth spur gear. That will go on next. And going on top of that is the smallest hex spacer. For the drive side, you'll take the longest hex spacer and slide that onto the shaft, and take one of the original spur gears and put that on top of it. Now we're ready to assemble our top plate onto the main module. But first let's press our 3 bearings into that top plate. And now we need to take the top plate assembly with the bearings in it and basically sandwich all the gear stack and get all the shafts so that they sit nicely in the bearings. This may take a few tries, takes a little practice, but they should go together pretty easily. Now we need to put the bolts and spacers in that will sandwich both the base and the top plate together. So we have 4 of our 1 3/4" long spacers. You're going to take them one at a time and just sandwich them between the 2 plates, and take your 2 1/4" long 10/32 socket head bolts and slide those in and start to thread them into the base plate. Start to hand tighten each of these. Then take your 5/32 Allen wrench and start to tighten and snug those up one at a time. Now we're at the step where you would start to integrate the modules into your frame. So we have a bottom plate that captures the 2x1 extrusion. We sell this extrusion at Thrifty Bot. You can buy it from other suppliers as well. It's designed to work on a 1/2" pitch grid pattern. And this is just an example showing you how to mount the module to the grid pattern tubing. Yours would need to be longer than this. You'll want to cut the 1/2" grid pattern tubing so that there's 1/4 inch from the whole pattern. This ensures that the tubing will clear as the wheels rotate. We also have a 3D printed tool that helps teams do this. It just plugs into the existing grid pattern and lets you line a saw blade up to it. So we will include that file for teams to download. But at this point, you're just taking those 2.5-inch long 1032 socket head bolts and feeding them through the bottom plate up into the base plate of your swerve module. There's also one standoff that goes in the corner, so you'll want to make sure you put that in as well. So now we have the modules mounted onto the corners of our drivetrain, and your frame is more or less assembled. Now we need to mount the motors to the modules. One of the last steps here is mounting the motors onto your narrow swerve modules. We have a Kraken X60 and a Kraken X44 for the azimuth here. We've already installed the billet motor mount spacers that are included as well. We have a smaller one for the X44 and a larger one for the X60. We also have two bearings that press into the top plates to support the motor shafts. You'll just press those right in. And then you'll take your 1032 motor mount bolts and go ahead and you can mount your motors. The drive motor goes on the inside here. Get that lined up nicely. And this is really one of the advantages of Thrifty Swerve in that the motor mount spacers are just all one part. So it makes attaching, removing the motor fairly quick. Go ahead and do the same with the azimuth. And then you'll want to install your spacer and one of your 1032 bolts. That just helps retain the bearing against the motor shaft. And just double check that your motors are able to spin freely and nothing's binding up there. And that concludes assembling your Narrow Thrifty Swerve module. Thanks for watching.